result was. I know we didn't start until close to 7:30.
I think there's like an update that keeps happening. I know it happened when we had like an internal meeting on Zoom. But the computer all froze.
That was the same time that Amazon had.
Oh, yeah, that's what me.
There's actually several.
Yeah.
different,
I heard on the news that they'd had a major problem, so.
Okay, you're live.
Okay. All right, let me officially call to order the New Shore Planning Board meeting for Wednesday, December 8th, 2021. Number one on the agenda, discuss amendments to zoning regulations related to the size and massing of residential structures. Zoning ordinances 406, residential structure meeting certain thresholds. Section 514, residential structures in the RA and RB zones. Section 111, general prohibitions in section 306E and 307E. I will turn it over to Allison Ring, our town planner, who will walk us through this.
Okay, so after our last meeting, this was on the agenda, but at the end of a long meeting of application, so we talked about having a special meeting to focus on this, and but it so happened our December agenda was light, so we were able to put this on, and hopefully that's some time to talk about what direction the planning board wants to go in. So there's several sections of the zoning ordinance that discuss large house regulations, and several were amended recently, reducing some of those maximum figures. And we talked about this being a two-step process. Those maximums, the reduced maximums will sunset January of 2023. So the planning board needs to take action, or we'll lose those reduced figures. There was other ideas talked about for additional amendments to these sections, and those are summarized within the memo here. And we also had taken a look at other communities. Prior memo from a while back with a couple of example ordinances from other communities. Vineyard. Just want to see. So, I guess I'm mostly looking for direction on what, from the planning board, as to what, if we can, I know it's hard, everyone has different opinions of, I'm sure, but where we can reach consensus, I can start trying to track some additional amendments. I was thinking maybe we have these golden items within the memo, and maybe that's a way to start engaging the board, and say, okay, we have this concept. The board, is there a consensus that we want to pursue that or not? And I can text it out, or we're not going to feel it out right now, or not interested, or if there is, or some of these concepts are things the planning board wants to explore further as a way to kind of look into the discussion. But Margie, it's up to you how you want. I guess does any planning board member want to give feedback? Is there any feedback now, or do you want to kind of structure it that way?
I like it, I was going to suggest that, but I have a question, two questions before we start. Given the expiration date of February 2nd, 2023, the ordinance change every 2 days, how will that expiration date affect any changes, additional changes that we are to bring about? Because in my imagination, I see numbers being in proportion to the latest proposal. You know what I mean? I see ratios, so it's.
So when the planning board, when the planning board drafts amendments now, we can modify what's in anything that's in it now. So the reason amendments could be changed, or we could maintain those and add additional ones. With this, like getting rid of we can just get rid of
What if situation, what if by 2023, we are told that the original proposals are no longer valid? That's what the town council says that. And it would seem to me would immediately in effect any additional changes.
The amendment, when the planning board recommends the amendment to the town council, part of that amendment, I would think would be to strike the language about sunset. Amen. Right? Yeah, if you want that to stay. Yeah. Try to recommend removing the sunset, so that, because if that's what the planning board is recommending as a long-term regulation, then we'll have that as a sunset be removed, so that it doesn't stay long-term.
Second, I was really, I read over your earlier documents and the building height seems to change depending on where you look. Under section 406, it says it must not exceed 25 feet, but in section 513 for RA or RB, I read 28 feet. What is the number?
Maximum height, I don't know, but it's
32.
an RA is 32, but it's
An accessory building, isn't that 25?
where, you know,
28, like, I mean, I read the same thing, but I thought that was in consideration to roof pitch. It was the actual construction, not,
Yes, it has dealt with roof pitch, but it's still a building height, right? I mean, regardless of the weight of the roof, it's
just,
no more than 28.
so it's on 514, number 6.
514.
It's a greater than 28 feet shall comply with the standard, so it wasn't. It was a greater than, not a,
Mhm.
so 28 to 32 pitch, those are the standards for the roof pitch.
Yeah.
Which, some associated questions just bring up something that, being new and trying to read some of this stuff, it's ridiculous. I'm gonna say that bluntly, it needs to be simplified. When a builder, mind you, reads this and has to come get it explained, never mind an architect or a homeowner, like you almost need a user manual just to get through zoning. And I think when it comes to what we're just talking about on this agenda item, I think if this was simplified, I think homeowners would actually know they have far more options than just building some monstrosity. When you really get this interpreted, there's a lot of play, if you would, or a lot of, you can get really creative in achieving something that you want without having something that's enormous. And so when we're talking about square foot, living space, things of that nature, it's when you're looking at a building that's 75 feet or long, like it's, I don't like it either. But if it was 75 feet total over 3 different dwellings, being a garage, one being a primary residence, one being a accessory residence or a apartment or whatever, then I don't have a disdain for the square footage. You follow? And if you read these, you can get there, but you really need, I mean, you gotta get it interpreted from staff, because it's really confusing. I don't know if taking all the amendments, when was the last time this was codified?
the zoning ordinance,
Yeah.
10 years ago.
So we have 10 years of amendments that
Can't find.
you can't necessarily find. And never mind some of the drawings that were included in the package, which were very helpful. But if you had drawings that this is what you can do, but more also drawings that this is what we don't want you to do, or don't suggest doing. You know, like do's and don'ts, but visual, I think it would be extremely helpful. Particularly with a lot of plans that are coming forward that are in that threshold of special use permit. You know, they're what's the, if it gets above 2,000, or that would be recommended.
The trigger for.
Right.
Special use permit. But below the prohibited.
Yeah,
It's not even clear enough that it's per building.
right,
You can assume that it's for all your buildings.
right, and I think that was one of the questions I had when you read this. my question immediately was like, all right, is this per dwelling or is this
Right.
per lot?
Well, per structure.
Yeah, or it's structure. The other question I had as far as coverage was where does things like hardscape fall into this? Because,
That's usually lot coverage and not lot, and it's not lot calculated into lot building coverage.
okay,
That's part of the 10%.
Right, so
Okay.
Billy comes and puts concrete all over your yard because that's what you want, it's your lot coverage.
well, I thought, yeah, well, that's
Right,
it's
so
like permeable, I
not
thought there was a
a-
difference between permeable and non-permeable. Like,
Well, then,
Again,
yes, something that is permeable doesn't count towards your lot coverage.
What it counts towards, excuse me, what counts towards that, like the 65,000 square foot, that's like driveways, pavers or whatever else, that's,
But 65,
you got the building volume in excess of 65,000.
that's-
It doesn't count
That's interior.
that's
hardscaping.
like the building, that's the structure, and so.
So none of these sections get into,
Right.
lot coverage, building lot coverage, that's covered in other sections of the zoning ordinance and applies to all buildings, not just, yeah, there's no different measurements.
And what category do swimming pools fall under?
Lot coverage,
Margie?
Yes.
So I agree with that all these things need to be considered. And I was thinking about what would be a good process, because right now it's, this boils up and that boils up, but they're all connected in these different ways and we're kind of going all over.
Yep.
And I thought if we could create a process that maybe start with like the real basics, like what is large? What are we considering a large house? And what do we consider a single family dwelling? And then go from there in terms of looking at those priority areas, like is it the economic impact, the environmental impact, the inclusionary impact, the aesthetics, the administrative impact, and sort of pull it apart from there. But also, I think that just like here, there's so many different perspectives, there probably are among the community as well. And it might be helpful to have a survey and come up with 10 really good questions and get more input from the public.
I think it would also be really valuable if I could somehow gave you a set of plans, each one of you, and you tried to figure out what this ordinance actually says and apply it, because it's surprising, it's very shocking to actually apply it to a property and realize that, okay, well, it's in this section, but then you have to go to another section, and then there's an appendix, and I get calls every single day from people trying to understand what this says. And,
Yeah, so that would be like the
you have to
administrative
use it
concern.
in designing something, it's really difficult to change it.
But I really think, I feel like we need a process because it is kind of complex and I think there is agreement. We want to make it simpler.
Right.
But in terms of how we do that, but that would be a priority that would keep in mind when we're crafting.
Are there other communities that have simpler formats? That you know of?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are some, simpler regulations, they.
No, not necessarily simpler, easier to read, in other words.
Yeah, I don't think we're looking for simple because we've got some fairly complicated situations here with when we get into wetlands and views, sheds and so forth. But if it could be written in an easier way to follow, I think that all people would be very grateful to us for that.
I guess the big question, I think what makes going back and storm regulations a little more complicated is there's the two different triggers, right? I mean, some communities might, they have a level that, okay, above this, you're gonna need review from a board, right? Design review. But they don't actually set the absolute maximum. Some communities may just set an absolute maximum, right? And here we have, there's two components to it. There's like that level where, okay, you're gonna need a review, but then the community also said, okay, but there is an absolute maximum, right? So that makes it a little bit more.
No, that,
that's not what I was.
There's still, I mean, we can maintain that concept and make it simpler if the board, because I remember back, we talked about the concept of just having absolute maximum, one plan board member said, oh, now it happened. Right, it does have an absolute maximum, and it never goes before the planning board, just like that, this is where, we don't want to go about this and not have that review. So that was the concept that would make things obviously very, very simpler. But the planning board may not want that, because you may want to take a look at individual.
I'm gonna say, the end result probably is not going to be what we want, so.
Yeah, that would take planning board out of it.
Yeah.
So right now, it's those two.
Well, there's actually three, because another money would be allowed by right without having to go for a site or being at the back. So, I mean, even if you wanted to work on a document that was like here to homeowners, if someone who's buys a property on the island, so they understand what the zoning ordinance is. As it stands right now, it's really difficult for someone to figure it out.
I know. We all know Gail wants to talk. Go ahead, Gail, jump in there quick.
Just because we talked about all this, I think that's phase two, and I think we do come to these determinations as to what proposed, and it is quickly and something that a layperson can comprehend. But I also, you guys know how I feel about the ordinance. I don't agree with any of how this new one was written, and I think it's too random. I'll be very blunt, but I find that when ordinances change from 4% to 3%, there was a lot of public input. There's a lot of builders and architects in this room every meeting putting input on height restriction, on what the 3% will do, what the 4% overall did, what impact it has on what people's choices are with building. And so I think when we say, okay, here's 2,000 and that's what you're getting, we don't know what all those ramifications are until this from some of these professionals who build it every day and know what people will typically go for during this time to maximize on their square footage. And I also think we need to consider our environment. I know we have an application coming up. I'm not personally involved in it. I just am aware of it, and they want a low-lying house that will fit into the landscape, but it's going to need space, and it's going to need, a plane of space, and they don't want to go up high. They want to be low-lying and long, and they're probably not going to be able to get what they want because we're going to be saying, no, if we keep these restrictions in place, because even if you could have a 2,000 square foot building and have your additional structures, you can't have them attached because that ends up. So that's something I think we should consider is if they're attached by a deck, let's not consider that all one building. Because you could exceed 2,000 square feet very quickly, depending on the size of your lot. If you have 5 acres, that's a lot of land that we're now telling people. And then when I see our numbers of recommendations, we're kind of just pulling numbers out of the air. And I think we need expertise to guide us with numbers when it comes to figuring these percentages out. Am I making sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. And I think it's also important to include the community members too, and not just have builders and developers and
Yes.
saying this is what we want, but so that we're including as many people as possible in the process.
Because our job is to represent everybody, which is both interesting and somewhat challenging.
How about if we just write what we don't want?
Yeah.
That gives people, and I'm half serious, that would give people so many more options for being creative, for finding alternatives. But we don't want X or Y.
Yes.
But sometimes people don't realize that they could build a single family dwelling and have an accessory residential structure or 3.
Mhm.
There's no limit on them. There's no limit.
That's
Yeah,
right.
and one of the things I think I'm interested in anyway is having a limit on accessory buildings. I think that may be based on the size of the lot, but certainly, right now, there is no.
But it's not what you really.
You want that.
If you don't want the massing,
No,
the
it's
large
a-
massing, then you would want.
But
the
no,
small
neither do I want 6 little buildings scattered all around either,
But
so
that's the true farmstead approach of life.
I might like 4 or maybe 3, but I'm not sure I'd want 6. But again, it partly is going to depend on how many acres that the lot has and whether or not it has the potential to be subdivided, which is something we always have to kind of keep a look at as an unintended consequence.
Well, that's why I like that Toro example, because I thought it answered that question eloquently. It said it had a square footage for all the buildings, and then it had reductions or additions for lot size as,
I was very intrigued with that also. I thought we might be able to take that and modify it to fit Black Island. Chris, you had your hand up.
This was a few comments ago about Christine's suggestion about a survey with a focus on, but also having us go through the zoning like Jen suggested, but it also would be nice to see what out there exists and how it actually, you know, like I had to, what does 75 feet of frontage or building look like where's it?
I can show you, I have plans that came in and it's 79.5 feet. So it exceeds.
But I think I'm looking
Just to give you an
at
idea of
more what exists, you know, and
In other words, you'd like some pictures of houses that show that.
existing things that
Okay.
fit the
how
ordinance.
the zoning was applied to and how it was.
I don't know.
To help you decide whether or not that's the right number, like a real life example.
Right,
to
like I,
respond to, I guess. Yeah,
like what,
like you can, in person, you can see a house and say whether or not.
even if it's
big
like,
or not.
go check out this property, don't go on the property, but just look, you can see that this is 5,000 square feet house on this many acres and or coverage and.
Yeah, we could do that. Give you
We
some
have pulled
examples.
that,
We pulled some of this,
The hard, you know, some of it is.
We didn't know what they were.
Predated regulations, we're not
Right.
gonna have some of those measurements. We will only things after, we would have some of those measurements because they were required to submit it.
I think it-
for review.
I
It
have
would
that.
help
first,
as
but I
far
don't know
as
if you can
saying
find it.
what you don't, like what Sosha said, what, you know, be easier to say what you don't want. I'm sure there's examples out there right now. I mean, let's face it, the way a lot of these ordinances and everything and work is someone does something and everybody's like, we gotta stop doing that. And so we draw something up.
Reactionary, yeah.
Wow. Wait,
Yeah.
Where'd you get this from?
Pocket size too.
Oh my gosh. So this is, from when is this, Jen?
That was from when this ordinance was.
Written.
This is gone.
Now, nobody on YouTube. Maybe we should turn it around for the YouTube people and take a look at it later.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
well, this is exactly it.
That's
One
good
of the
time.
things is, it's like you have that 75-foot total building plane, but you can't have a wall plane more than 45 feet, so that without a 6-foot jogger. So that allows, you know, it to be broken up and have roof lines. And I mean, one of the things I like to see is, you know, roof lines kind of give a house a lot of character. You know what I mean? Rather than a big shoebox with a
Yeah.
single pane roof. you know?
Absolutely.
So I would rather see a
Right,
house
here.
like, rather than square footage reduction as a solution, maybe you should break it up where, you know, I think you mentioned, Chris, where it's, you know, one section of the house can be to the maximum height, but if it's a fairly large house, other section of the house can only be a certain other.
Below to, yeah.
There's one
Oh,
right here.
that way it creates roof lines,
Yeah, that one,
And-
Hazard's here.
you
Here
know.
are two of them that you're talking about, the far right top
Hmm,
and
Here you've got like 3 capes in one.
And
Because,
this ordinance was created because of a house that was
Right.
built on Spring Street that Margie, I remember, she was before I was. So I can
Oh,
send you
yeah.
some details on that, just so you can see.
Because that didn't have the jog at 45 feet.
Yeah.
It was a flat 70 or something.
Just one wall.
Yeah, because these
Yeah.
regulations have come
Yeah, they have a
about since
job,
I've been
yes.
on the board, when we realized that we were getting some major problems in design, and that we needed to make sure that we got the best work possible. So that, again, so all of the neighbors and people driving by, it's pleasing to the eye when he looks at it,
Yeah.
and it's also functional. But, we look at aesthetics along with everything else.
Yeah, so I mean, the current ordinance does, it combines both size and massing regulations. So it does get into design, but not over, I mean, I would say it's very prescriptive, like as far as the architecture in any way, but somewhat, there are some things, like, requiring that job and some like, the needs, the types of roof heights.
And we did have experts in for the roof lines, because we both, the committee felt that if we get the roof lines correct, the rest of it sort of falls into place. If the roof line is wrong, the whole thing is thrown off. So we did have experts in helping us helping us design roof lines for regulations.
Architects and help with
Yeah.
that.
Had several of them.
And I don't think that we've heard anything.
Nobody,
That part.
I haven't heard, if there are complaints, I have not,
I haven't heard.
I haven't heard it. Yes,
But I think that, oh, sorry,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead. I think, when people say, like, I don't think all large houses are unattractive, but sometimes they are, just like small houses could be. But I think one of the things that makes them unattractive is that they end up being kind of cookie cutter, and they don't really have a unity to them, and these are so hard to define and regulate, and just like, is it in harmony, with the surroundings? Like, that's so subjective, and
Yeah.
I think,
And that subjective is the word that we used a lot. It's very hard to say what is good design. You know it when you see it,
yeah,
and you know it when it's not there, but how to codify it and say what is and is not, when things are very subjective, is difficult.
But I think you could make a good argument for large homes being deleterious or affecting the environment negatively simply by the use of material that it took to produce those large homes.
yeah, I think that's definitely like a fact, that it's inefficient use of resources, more greenhouse gas emission. There is an
Right.
environmental impact of the large house.
I think
That
the
a
whole
small
climate
house doesn't
change
have.
issue.
And if the neighborhood is already built, the impact that it has on the surrounding neighborhood can be very severe if it's a huge house and not that big amount of acreage, which again goes back to, I kind of like the ratio of large houses to acreage. So there's a balance there. Something that's 10 acres and that you can't really see it, as opposed to something that's 2 acres and you see it readily, does make a difference, both to the streetscape and to all the neighbors surrounding.
I wonder if you could explore a review on just the siting and massing, just like kind of similar to what HDC does, but I don't know, if it's over a certain square footage,
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
and then you're just reviewing it.
And it would have to be like, how visible is it too? Like, is it,
I just feel as though we should keep options open for people, because I like to see a variety of sizes of homes rather, like
Mhm.
large, medium, small. If we push people down a path of like, we're gonna restrict it so much, then they're just gonna build a bunch of little tiny ones. Cottages, we don't wanna restrict it so much where we're pushing them down that path. I would rather have it where,
You go into boxes because you can maximize the square footage in the
Yeah.
box.
and like, Gail said before about adding a wing onto a house, for example, should that count as part of the whole house? I'm not really sure about that. Because some people have different needs, like maybe I've seen it where a parent has become elderly and they need care. And so what the, daughter does or son does is they add an addition onto the house so it can easily care for them, like a wing. You know what I mean? So you don't want to remove that option from people, when they have something like that. And I've also seen, in the same effect, where, daughter is now moving on to the next stage in her life, has gotten married and is starting to raise a family, and the parents, they say, hey, you can live in the main house and we'll attach a wing and live in the smaller part. You know what I mean? So it's just kind of like, we gotta give people options. You don't wanna rule that.
Your option would be to do a detached structure.
What's that?
The option would be to do a detached.
Yeah,
But that's what I was
detached.
trying to suggest, maybe not having an attached via a deck and a covered porch. So it's a separate
Yeah, I
section
think
of a
that-
house, but not. But
Yeah,
now we consider it all one in square footage, I think, if the deck is part of it.
Isn't there a lot?
3%, but say if it's a 4-acre lot, you might not, that might not be an issue.
Does the 2,000, I'm referring to the 2,000 square foot rule, does that not include decks?
The 2,000, if it triggers, it would be
It's the first.
it's exclusive of ground level
Right.
floor deck
Okay,
for getting that extra level of
but you
review.
wouldn't be able to include a covered porch, like for what Bill's example is, which is a good one, actually, thinking about adding on, you had a deck and an additional structure with roof coverage so they could walk from the main house to the addition.
Yeah, I think that starts to get it into the, like, its own building.
Right, but I'm considering you're still within your 4%, but we've hit our threshold. I don't suggest any of this fall over the guidelines that were created in 1989. I'm thinking more of trying to work within what zoning allows to relieve ourselves and everyone from lawsuits and whatnot, because we're stricter than the 4% allows in some cases.
Isn't there a Rhode Island elderly housing ordinance that says you
Yeah.
regardless, you can put an apartment in your house for
Yeah,
elderly?
All right, we have that.
Yeah, so that, we already do address that, yeah. And so that would cover like the scenarios you were describing.
Because that would allow the 2 kitchens if
Mhm.
you met the requirements in that.
But I think that math would still apply.
Yeah, it's still,
Yeah.
Yeah,
As it should, because neighbors are going to have to look at the house, 24/7. So it should have certain guidelines that have to be met.
and that would be a temporary use for that house, and so I think the kitchen has to be pulled out, right, when it's no longer
It's
used.
hard to
Yeah.
enforce, so, yeah. It's more difficult, it's really, for me, this is a very difficult subject. It's so complex.
it is.
For everything you propose, there's a loophole that you can think of.
Well, and that's why I think there was that level of review, right? You come up with a figure that you want to take a look at, right? That's, okay, up to this amount, right? But then above that, we want to have some review so that you can decide whether or not it is appropriate or, so that was the thought process there.
When somebody asks me, what's the character of the island? I would have to answer in what century or in what decade? And one of the spirits of the island, as I perceive it, is independence, a sense of independence that would encourage a variety of tastes. I don't see us as a cookie cut community. But I do dislike the really large structures from a philosophical point, if nothing else. Who in the world needs a house that big, given the global resources that are limited? Why should a few people hog them?
But I mean, there's a difference between who needs it and who wants it. And I don't want, like, you go down that road, you're going down, like, that's getting completely off track. I can justify a need for a 5,000 square foot house if I can afford it. I will justify it. I can justify it very easily.
Well,
And that's the problem, is like, our definition of justification is gonna be different than somebody who wants, the gym inside, their wine cellar, two rooms for where their kids come visit, never mind when they have I could justify the hell out of a 5,000 square foot house.
Yeah.
It's very easy,
and
especially if I can afford it. I mean, I think the focus isn't on whether or not it's justified, it's whether or not it falls within social, I agree with you, like, what's the character, like, the character in this decade or last decade? Or, what decade?
Well, that's what I was trying to say. If you look back at history, I mean, look at like Mansion Beach. Why was it named Mansion Beach? It was a big mansion there. That was for a single home. And the Hygeia, there's many hotels out here that they weren't originally hotels. They were, like the Hygeia. That was a home for a doctor built for his wife. So it's
The
not
annex.
it's not like large homes haven't been here before. If you predate it, you know what I mean? So it's and it's fun for some people to look at, like, hey, look at that big mansion, wow. And you can dream and wish you were in it and you had all that, it's kind of like when someone drives by with a fancy car, I don't.
No, I agree. I like them.
Originally, the whole concept of review versus massing in some cases, because what do you want to see? Do we want to eventually not see anything that reminds us of the 1800s? Is that what is the goal? And the goal could change when we're no longer here. Everything's bound to change. That's the only thing we can rely on. But I think that it's important for us to define, and maybe that's part of the survey. What drew you to Lafayette? Was it the architecture, or the difference, the variety, can all be part of how we determine what is important to people today.
Sorry.
Because there's some really gorgeous, beautiful homes out there that are really big, in Rhode Island, in Massachusetts, in old New England towns. But I also can relate to the resources they do take up.
And I agree that it's good. We need a mix of options too, because if we go towards bigger and bigger houses, so what's the average single family home in the United States? Is like 2,200 square feet. And we're kind of in that area, but now
Is it today?
yeah, but we're moving higher and becoming bigger and bigger. And that makes it harder for moderate. It drives up the prices and harder for somebody to do something if they have moderate means. And so then we do get more homogeneity in the community. Is that the right homogeneity? Yeah, homogeneity like that. Good. In the community, if it starts to push that way. So I think we need to make sure that we do have a mix of options.
I guess one thought. Are we still on the same, should there be I guess starting with, there's been an absolute maximum on the since 2008. Do you agree that there should be an absolute maximum still? It's just deciding where we go, yeah. I guess I'm
Yeah, I think there
yeah,
needs,
you agree, if there was no absolute maximum, the houses would be a lot bigger.
Yeah.
It would be an application for 10,000 square foot house.
You
Yeah,
still have to fall under that 4%, 3%, main house, 4% rule,
Yeah,
right?
if you have a 4-acre lot, that's a 7,000 square foot.
yeah, and that's meaning,
On a 4-acre lot, it's 32 and change, right? We're talking footprint.
but I think,
So yeah, so 6,000 square feet.
I just can't get behind not having a maximum. I'm sorry, I'll just say that.
What's the concern with it?
Yeah.
That maximum,
Like a 53.
again,
square
I think the last meeting my concern is, again, loopholes, like whatever we come up with is loopholes. If you're not gonna give a homeowner who has the square footage, the land, space, to put up a 7,000 square foot dwelling. Because we have a maximum, but he can subdivide or they can subdivide. Would you rather live with something that's 7,000 square feet on one big lot, be restricted, no subdivision, or would you rather live with 4,000 square foot home? I don't know if that applies anywhere, but those are the things that come up when I hear size restriction is, okay, well, you're not gonna let me build a 7,000 square foot home on this big piece of land that I have. I'm gonna subdivide it, I'm gonna put up 3,000 square foot home, therefore, you just lost, I got 2,000 extra feet of livable space. And
Well, that's assuming that they'd be allowed to do that big of a house on the smaller lots, but.
Yeah, that's where.
There are some still out there, there's not many, but there
Yeah.
are some.
And remember, there are a lot of things that happen that reduce, for example, wetlands. If you've got a lot of wetlands on the property, then you can't build that 8 acres, for example. It may be reduced down to 6 because 2 acres of that are wetlands, you can't build on it. And so, but I do think you need a maximum, because if you don't, there's going to be somebody who comes along and says, I want to do it just because I can afford it, I have the land, I'm going to do it, and it doesn't matter what you say. So I think we do need to have some maximums beyond which you cannot build, and they need to be published so that people are well aware of that before they buy the property. We do not want to have some of the huge houses like you can find on some places in Southampton or the Vineyard or whatever, because we're a smaller, more rural community, and I think we want to promote that smallness and rural nature that we have found, which is why many of us come to the island in the first place. One of the things that has really irritated me over the years is that people come here because they love the farm-like life out here, the rural thing, and probably want to change it as soon as they bought their piece of property. They clear the land, they put in lawns. There's nothing rural about the character by the time they finished. So we want to, if possible, put some regulations in beyond which they cannot build, because some people just would want to do it because they can. So I feel very strongly about that. I was also thinking while Allison was talking, maybe we want to organize it into 3 sections and start with a part that is by right, so that people do not have to do anything. By right, they are allowed to do these things, and that may meet their needs.
And that might be a separate outside of the ordinance document.
Possible.
And put some
And with drawings of what would be by right, what would not be by right. Then go to the next section, which would be these things would trigger a special use permit. And the third section is you cannot do these things. You cannot build beyond a certain square footage. You can't run, roof lines that are 40 or 50 feet high, things that you absolutely are forbidden to do, including the size of the house, a maximum of size. And so that would be three distinct sections. Most people will start use just number 1, which would be by right. A few will go on to 2, and then 3 will tell them what they absolutely cannot do. So that's a thought.
Do we have this Truro example? Do we have anything like this on the chart down here? That says lot size.
I love that.
I thought it was intriguing and helpful.
So, yeah, 'cause right now we don't have, no, but if we go in the direction of having like a area limit, then, we can read that. I mean, we have tables comparing the different sections of the ordinance, right? The maximum is different. If we were to incorporate that, have different, right now there's just one set
Right.
number, but if you wanted to have it based on lot size, yeah, we probably want to have it.
But if the lot is larger, it's equivalent to more than one building lot. And then allows for a certain size home, then it should be added that lot cannot be subdivided.
Thank you. I wanted to make sure that got in. Good job.
Yeah, it's because they're getting that larger house.
That's loophole. I think we did that with a property in the next year. They didn't want to subdivide. They had 10 acres. And they were allowed to build a second home, and the longer they didn't, that was all taken into consideration when they would build.
We've done this on a couple of properties, including one very large property around the Great Salt Pond. But they had, in order to get that permission, they had to agree not to subdivide. Otherwise, you get all that, you build it and you subdivide, and then suddenly you can have 2 more lots. So no, that has to be in there somewhere.
You're right.
Wasn't
That's
there-
the one that, it was a-
Wasn't there?
it was a secondary home and,
Yeah, wasn't there a rule, put in place that your accessory building couldn't be more than 50 feet away from the main structure to
that's,
prevent subdividing?
Yes.
that's for the, home family, that's for the secondary dwelling development, the 50,
Oh, all right.
50, so that's.
I was wondering about
There
that.
aren't that many lots that could.
Yeah.
That's again, you have to have the plan, you have to.
That's sure.
Yeah, I'm just saying, in other words, limit how far apart the buildings can be. So, you know,
The wealthy can afford to buy more than one existing home. Tear down the home. Unify it properly. Okay. Cannot rule out rebuild.
That's okay. You know, if they meet all the rules and regulations, more power to them. You know,
Right,
But
but
that-
there might not be a lot of 4 or 5 acres lots available, they
Exactly.
exist with buildings on them, and that's what you're, that's
Yeah.
what you have to consider.
And I think that that brings up something for me about that if we can encourage people to, if they do have like a historic home, to restore rather than tear down. I mean, that would be, or at least part of it. If there's some way to put that in the ordinance, I think that would be a good use of resources and help with the vernacular. Yeah.
Like, I just in the past 6 months, I know 2 people that have tried to do that, and it's like, once they get into it, they realize they can't say it.
can of worms,
It's
yeah.
like,
Yeah.
They really try.
Or at least,
Obviously, like, you know, I think taking into consideration, if it can't be saved, at least building in the same character as.
something like that,
existing. I mean,
yeah.
That I'm in more favor of, because something is sometimes actually more damage trying to restore a whole house.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I ended up, my house is not that old, but we ended up taking down one section because it had sunk. And as the carpenters all said, it's gonna cost way more money than what is taking it down and starting all over again, where we can fix the basement so that it doesn't sink, than trying to pour money into it. And he said, and then it may not work anyway. So then we took it down.
Yeah, that's what's happening down on the square, Chapel Road. There's a lot of foundation. So
Yeah. Well,
they're-
Yeah, when your floor goes like this.
this actually might touch on the point that Gail brought up about maybe we should reach out to the local tradesmen and ask them, you know, things like this, like their experiences with state stuff, their, what they think, and maybe get some ideas from them. I think we should reach out to them because they, you know, got a lot of in-field
Yeah.
experience that will be useful.
Yeah, and it really leads us to what had happened years ago when the whole ordinance was changed, reaching out by survey, reaching out to tradesmen and everyone. So we'll
Yeah.
get everybody's feedback, because I think a lot of people have, there's people who will probably here who are in these trades on the mainland too, and understand the logic, but also understand, have a different perspective on. But they're entering into this market and into this place we call home, and also have ideas on how, might have some answers for us, towards
I just
part of
don't,
that survey process.
I mean, reading some of these examples from other towns, I think we're at the curve.
Oh, yeah.
I think so too.
I mean,
I feel like we're the most restrictive.
so it's not all doom and gloom, it's, I think using the suggestion of taking it into election, survey is a good one. And at the end of the day, at the end of this whole process, having something zoning ordinance readable.
yeah, a little more streamlined.
Yeah.
Because honestly, if you're a homeowner and you start reading through this, and you're having a market, you know, I would just default to, all right, let's just put up one big building and see what happens. Instead of getting creative and like, you know, and a lot of, you know, and I think I said this at the last meeting too, when it came to the maximum footprint. You know, I think someone touched on, you can't subdivide, there was a restriction, you can't subdivide with two. That, I didn't know that existed, that was in there. But also taking into consideration, building heights, when there's homes going up with, seaside or sea view or ocean view. If, I don't mind a larger home going up if the largest portion of it wasn't above a certain, was like a ranch style, and then the main house, like, I find that a lot better when I would rather sacrifice first floor square footage than second floor square footage. I don't know, that would probably make it a little more complicated, but when it comes for consideration, I don't know if it over, you know, if it comes in front of the planning board for consideration, that actually can't be considered. Meaning,
Having allowing for a larger footprint for a single story residence is, yeah.
Right.
You mentioned that last time.
If there's a height maximum. that
well, even if
is
the height maximum
25
was,
feet
you know, like
or
25 feet is still big for a single, like, my house is 25 feet. It's 2 stories.
Yeah.
It's probably 28.
You know, but a true 15-foot single story dwelling is, I think.
There goes yours.
um,
Exactly those things.
It's more appealing to me than,
Yeah.
you know, a stacked house that's big monoplate and the wall is 2 stories at 75 feet instead of 1 story at 75 feet.
I'm inclined
And
to
it depends
agree.
on the landscape, exactly. I brought that up at the last meeting with, when you walk along from Bean Point to Andy's Way, 90% of the houses are all along the line. Because they were trying to fit into their landscape and their views were already tremendous and they didn't need to go up. But if you constrict people to square footage on your footprint without any relaxation whatsoever or any ability to extend those, yeah, you're gonna get the boxes. And then
You're gonna get the
that
height.
same wall,
You're
you're
gonna-
gonna find
And it's already, you already see
10
it.
boxes there instead of 10 long, low line.
Well, we
houses.
do have that option in our, in the special use permit, right?
Right.
You can go low or go high, but also I was reading in California that they added if you have higher ceilings, like 14-foot ceilings, that counts double the floor footprint in that area. So that way, that's a mechanism to control, like if you're gonna go high, you can't go wide. You know, like you gotta choose between wide or high. You can't have both.
Into
Yeah,
volume.
yeah.
Yeah, that would go, we get some volume.
Yeah.
That would not.
Okay.
And- My last comment, if you don't
Okay,
mind.
yeah, because I want to wrap this up in probably another 5-10 minutes, because we do have several other items on
My
the
pet
agenda.
peeve, even more than a home that's
Inexcusably large, is lack of architectural design. So that they are clumping every little architectural feature inside one square box just to make it look like it's bigger or better or whatever. And the one that comes to mind, won't mention names. Like this house, it's completely out of proportion. These, what you want to call dormers, outweigh the proportion of the roof, so that the house looks like a mushroom. So I think whatever design people pick, it has to preserve an integrity of design. And we don't, we cannot dictate what taste to follow or what design to choose, but if you do choose a design, have it maintain its integrity. Don't mix everything up.
Just so hard to bring, like.
That's going to say, that goes, that is very difficult to do. With- I say-
That, you know, and some, right, like, you say you wanna have flexibility and architectural interest and diversity. I mean, I get it, you want a nicely designed home, whatever architecture it is, but again, it's hard to regulate the state, and that's why, like, and then you become too restrictive, when you say, okay, and again, with different Yeah, and I know, and Neil brought that up as a recommendation, that we apply those guidelines.
I'll throw this out. There have been some talk over the years of having HDC cover the entire island. People are very pro and con on this. It's not an answer that one size fits all. So there are pluses and minuses. But it is something we may want to discuss, not tonight, but down the road, or whether we want to look into that more thoroughly, or just the time just not ripe yet.
The fact that less than a third of the number of houses on the island are year-round housing. 500 something, and the total number of homes is well over 18,000. We have to respect, if nothing else, the wishes of people who don't live here year-round. They do own the property, they do pay their taxes. We can't, in other words.
That's why I said we have to look at all sides
Yeah.
as a planning board. You don't look just at,
Purpose, so within the ordinance, there's a section for purpose, and I get to some of what you guys were talking about in more detail. I wonder if expanding that or having some type of, brief introduction that could be explained in further detail what you're looking for, as a community. But then whether or not, maybe it is to refer people, as people come in, inquiring about it. So you're kind of introducing your regulations, you're like, but this is what we're looking for, and maybe refer to HCC guidelines that might help when you're designing. And not to force people, but as basically this informational letter.
or even come have a little pamphlet with some photos or drawings of what we are looking for and what we are not looking for.
Yeah, I think especially if you gotta come for a special use permit, because if you don't have to come and you meet the guidelines.
That's why I say, let's do the first
do whatever you
section.
want.
First section says, what you can do, and that may take care of the problem.
And we're talking about a specific application just for these type of projects that collects the information, so we're not going through the plans, trying to find it. So having kind of the letter, the summary of the regulations, and then the application, that might help guide people, not that it's for the thing along, but. That's where my game today might help.
I think it's an important question.
Well-
Is how many people out there live? How many people are for the service?
Okay.
Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, I would love to know the answer to that too, since I've been dealing with this off and on for probably 15 years, and some years I thought we'd make it through, and other years, absolutely not. So supposing we ask Allison to put together some questions for a survey, and then we look at those in January. And if you have the specific questions, email Allison or Jen, either one or both, and we could put together something that we could approve in January, and then maybe February or March have contractors in to actually talk. And I will remind you, our final version also has to be advertised for comments, as it will when it goes again to the town council. So they're going to have several bites at the apple, so to speak.
We could also add on as far as the other suggestion of having, as far as 3 parts, look at the requirements that fall within the threshold, just review those at the next meeting as well. Do we can get that off the plate, or if that's
So basically anything that's below that first threshold is permitted.
2,000 feet?
So section 406 is the threshold, so.
406.
Yeah, so, if your building footprint is below, is 2,000 square feet or below, exclusive of ground level decks or living area, it could be up to 3,300 square feet, and a gross area up to 5,000 square feet, building volume up to 45,000 cubic feet. So those are your permitted.
We can also talk about whether or not any of those need to be adjusted once I think probably once we've done the survey. But
Yeah.
I think, let's start with,
So I can look at a table, we have the table, so maybe.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Survey, this is the current, you know, this is what you can do, yeah, by right, by, needs review, prohibited, and at least people have that snapshot to respond to, and one of the questions, right, would be like, are these figures appropriate, or, you know,
and I'd be interested in asking people if they thought using one of these charts would be easy to use.
That chart is something different than what we actually have in our regulations.
Okay,
So.
you don't want to do that at this,
Just being able to educate the public.
okay, I see what you're saying, there's a conflict, okay.
But you can build on that, Mario. You could ask what format helps you understand our regulations the best.
No, because they won't have any idea what the formats are, they'll have no clue.
Questions that at least it can give you some feedback. And then.
Yeah,
So
so
they
they
figure out what, yeah,
Okay.
what people.
You guys are the experts, why don't we leave it to you? If you, but for the committee, if you have either topics or particular questions that you would want them to consider, send them an email in the next week or so, so that they can be thinking about it and maybe craft that as part of an overall question or even a separate question.
Can we just circle back to the.
Sure.
The low height, so if they decided on that maximum height of 15 feet and if the property owner agrees to never exceed 15 feet in height, then they can have an extra percent of lot building coverage. So think about that. What that would look like.
Yeah.
If somebody wants coverage this way, not this way.
But you have to make very sure that 10 years down the road, we aren't going to have a different owner coming back wanting to put a second story
But
on.
you have to do it in.
Okay.
The special use permit has that.
Okay.
process.
Yeah.
The decision is recorded and.
Well, I think this was a very good beginning discussion. By no means is it the end, but it's certainly a very good start. Okay, good. Thank you. All right. Moving on to number 2, which says, discuss possible amendments related to zoning ordinance section 513, accessory apartments. You have a copy of the draft amendments to section 513, and I again will turn it over to Allison to kind of walk us through suggested changes and where she's got some comments where we could weigh in with opinions on in what direction she should go.
So the reason this came up, on the board agenda, Block Island Housing Board has, a letter submitted to the planning board requesting that the town, consider in section 513, responsibilities listed in section, that assigns the housing board responsibility. So they were requesting that they be removed from that, and I'm aware of it, and I've been involved with it. And the other couple, when we were talking about other items, we were giving more flexibility potentially within section 513. And then we also have noticed within one-time responsibilities, the building official is listed because we had a combined building and zoning official. Now that's been changed to a separate task function. Switching out zoning official or building official is appropriate in most sections of the zoning ordinance, including this one and in several parts of it. There's a couple sections here where building official is still listed, so we're talking about, reviewing. Code, the building code, but in other sections, the zoning official is more appropriate, function. And so within subsection, so, okay, A, no change of purpose, section B has, Block Island Housing Board listed 3 times, switching our zoning official at town. There was quite a bit of conversation about this, But I think there was maybe some confusion here. This subsection is talking just about affordable accessory apartments, so we're talking about only those that are deed restricted that, would be considered like officially affordable, like capital F, not like especially on the lower moderate income housing chart. And I don't think there are any within, with on the island, no. Right now, nobody takes advantage of, this tax benefit that's offered because they're not being utilized, they're not being restricted, right? So this actually isn't even being used, but I don't know if the housing board was kind of, I think the housing board thought it was more of a global, like they were supposed to be monitoring all of the factors. But,
Can I ask a question about
yeah.
the definition of affordable?
Mhm.
Where is it?
Well, there's different, so within, the state definition of affordable is up to 120%, area median income, 80% if you're talking about rental, 120% restricted in perpetuity, and have to have achieved some sort of government subsidy that could come in the form of a density bonus or outright funding. Within locally, however, it goes up to 140%, like the definition within the zoning ordinance is up to 140% given the need here, that needs a need here, because the housing cost being so high, the housing board does, there are projects here for, up to 140%.
But those don't count.
Then the state doesn't count
Those.
those.
Those are, they have above 120 won't get counted.
Right.
Oh, I didn't know that.
100%.
Really?
That we need to,
How does that make R 513 affordable though? Because we're not.
we haven't had any.
Okay.
So I don't even know.
But are people aware of it? I didn't even realize that part of the ordinance existed.
Well, it's because you, as a homeowner, you need to go through, I think, several. You will have an affordable accessory apartment. The rest of the section allows for an accessory apartment. Around housing park.
Right.
This section, I mean, because of 405, which is the ability to create like affordable housing, like Cherry Lane and 1120. Because that exists, I don't know if. I don't know.
So
if this
the
makes-
affordable housing component of this ordinance is really separate, but in the ordinance so that someone could apply.
Other tools to provide affordable housing. I mean, I think in general, we provide affordable housing, not provide.
Well, that's what, but I'm not sure that the word affordable applies with 513, because some of the components in that 513 are not affordable. I mean, or
They're not rent.
but they're not considered under the affordable housing because they were thinking, I'm gonna give this guy a break, I'm giving this guy a place to live.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people call us and say, how much are apartments going for today?
They're market, right, they're market for the factor. Yeah, in this case, right, the subsection B is to provide lower rents to income eligible individuals or families. And in exchange for doing so, we create a 513 and are willing to charge a rate that is, it's advertised every year. It's on a, it's like a general HMA rate for West Village, Block Island, the several communities, they take the average installment, come up with based on the number. It is legal, based on the number of individuals in your family, how much income, so if you're willing to create affordable housing unit, have it restricted and
But we're not talking about,
then you.
we're not talking about erasing.
No, I'm just explaining what it is, so, then you would be eligible, the town in exchange for that is saying here that they would not tax, the property taxes will be reduced for you in exchange for that, but you're getting financial benefit to provide that. So that's kind of where that subsidy comes in.
And where does the term attainable housing?
That's like the rest of it. I mean, personally, I think this section should be incorporated in section 405. That's really the section that's talking about, affordable housing, and this, I mean, we don't have any of section B, because most of them fall under section C, which is the general standard, and,
Right.
you know, the town will go out and do inspections every week, year-round, rent issues year-round, but there's no like affordability part to it. It's just, it's a tool to create a feasible year-round.
But this affordable component that I say, but I don't think a lot of people are aware that it exists.
I don't think so either.
Because it's so complicated to actually
Apply.
Or
apply.
an individual property owner
Yeah.
create it and then have to have the monitored and, yeah, it's not.
It would be something that the housing board would be able to use. If they didn't want to create lots for
But
sale.
I wouldn't rule everybody out.
Right.
I mean, we've had it for a while and I haven't had anyone even ask me.
I think it's an awareness.
Yeah. Really year round.
Well, community in both sections and affordable to reference.
Okay, yeah, I think maybe a reference.
Or at least a reference from one to the other. Wait,
Yes. that's
Okay.
a good idea.
Christine, you had a question?
Should I speak to the mic?
Sure.
Only because I know that people complain that they can't hear. So I'm just for YouTube, I'm Kristen Bauman, I'm a resident of High Street. I'm here for something else about this ordinance, but if I can make a comment on this. We did think we had affordable units. I thought I was getting the tax break. So I take offense to this, that there are currently no 513s. I thought I was following all the rules. I was inspected. My lease is on file in the office. I was given no further instructions. So I would debate that it wasn't about awareness. I was aware. I wasn't told what my next step should be.
For the affordable component?
Yeah.
513 component?
For the affordable component. And this is old history. This is not about anybody in this room. You know, this is like just for further discussion and understanding. To your point about awareness, I was well aware, and I asked for that, and I followed the rules I was given.
You didn't get it?
I think there's something.
No,
I feel like
nobody got it.
The past couple of weeks talking about this, I think people thought, even how we were, this section applied to all 513. So that's, and then, and then originally what we were thinking, and then the tax benefit would apply to all 513s. And so it was confusing when we learned that no 513, checking with the tax assessor's office and building department that had been reviewing, tracking them, nobody paid in the tax benefit, and why not? And because there's a tax penalty, like you have to pay it back. And then looking at it further, like, well, it looks like this is just for deed restricted, like, but that was never
Clear.
explained, I guess.
Yep.
Did you
I'm
create
sorry.
yours before 2006?
What was the question?
When did you build your 513?
I know, I wish I knew that date. Do you know that date?
I think this was amended after you built. Because this was created, I remember Bill Lambert coming in, and I think he was representing the housing board when they were first formed, because I vaguely recall.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, I just for informational services, we thought,
FYI.
it's not that there's no one taking advantage of it, we didn't know how to. Or I didn't know how to. And I really try to follow the rules.
Even the ordinance talked about, within the ordinance, it talked about how rules and like forms should be created.
Yeah.
But they
And that could be
didn't.
Jen's point, that maybe I didn't have that information yet.
Well, I think you might have applied under a different ordinance.
Could've.
This could have been amended after,
Could've.
after.
Yeah, yeah.
But everything else you do comply with.
Right.
And most of them do. I mean,
Right.
you have, it's a restricted process and you.
Right.
You have to rent it to year round, but you're not restricting the affordability. You're not screening your tenants for compliance with the state. No ability, like guidelines.
No, but I do charge a rate that
Yeah, I think.
It's
I think
less
what-
affordable.
And I think what you're doing, I don't think isn't, I mean, because it's how many of these, 53? Because I didn't know what you're explaining right now, wasn't aware of this, and this was brought up. You got here and I brought this up 5 years ago at the council level. When was the last time, because we're talking about affordable and attainable housing, well, we have 53 apartments, how many of them are actually, like, we didn't know as, at the council level, what was being in compliance. We were sure that they were in compliance, but I'm thinking compliance is, all right, they're all 513, so we're good,
Right.
but that wasn't,
No, the ones that have been inspected, there's a handful that are not in compliance, but the rest of them
are in compliance, but aren't necessarily
They're
fall
not
within the
falling
affordable
in
guidelines
the
because,
affordability.
but
100%.
that's, okay.
Yes.
and that's okay, like.
That, you know, no, that's what I'm saying, that's okay, and I think there's a lot of them out there that actually are, what would fall into the
Yeah.
affordable guidelines, they're just not taking advantage of the tax benefit.
Right, and that's what we wanna learn,
Yeah.
why aren't they, like, yeah, so we need to figure that out.
Yeah.
If there are things that need to be changed with this, like, you know, why, is it a bigger issue, or is it the concern of the punishment?
I'd be aware as far as I was talking about, for do not factor the 513 exists, just the fact that this is affordable.
There's an affordable component to it. Me and I always thought 513 meant affordable.
Well, that's why I think by default they are.
Right.
And most of the time, they're affordable. And it is a good tool to provide
Right.
Yeah.
No, which I agree, just with this tax benefit portion of it.
it. And again, I believe that section was created for the housing board to create your own ordinance that are governed by the housing board and in compliance with the state guidelines for
Yeah.
120, 140%. Not the average homeowner looking to create a project,
Didn't it stem from 406, which was
but.
like
Or,
513, and that didn't have any affordable component to it.
I
It was really just
Four
providing
oh
on
five
the housing.
Yes, it was at 1.406, yeah. Yes. But it wasn't written.
But you know, a lot of people were created because they wanted to have a caretaker on the property, and they wanted a second kitchen, and they wanted all these things, so this was all part of that, not that. And then for affordable housing, you one way after that.
Right, so then the affordable housing boards could come in and use this section to create like, all housing. Because you're not subdividing, so 405, in the double density is bigger than that, 75%, but it's talking about like creating lots.
So
I mean,
is-
maybe we need to like circle back with the housing board and kind of just talk to this before we go to the town council with any changes. I just want to kind of clarify just this section and maybe, of course, nothing's ever simple, right? I mean, it's we thought this section was gonna be just some simple, but then of course, you learn more and, you know, then like, changes that we made or, yeah, improvements. So I think we need to talk more about the affordable accessory apartment section and any other changes should be made, to that, and then. Okay, so then there was, in section 2, there's some stricken language here. It just seemed to be redundant and not, I got a comment that it's not clear, this section, so it just seems redundant. Same thing with general standards. Okay, so let's start first. There is a restriction on the number of bedrooms, so that was set at a maximum of 2 bedrooms. There, we did receive comments, okay, should a 3rd bedroom be allowed? You know, the benefits of that, maybe, you know, being more accommodating to a family, however, there would be like impact, you know, on your septic system. The secondary unit, like, not a lot. The OWTS impact of that.
But that would,
size of the structure, you know, so.
it would also have impact on the square feet of living area.
Right, so then, yeah, further down, there's the maximum set for size. So right now, it has to be a minimum of 300 square feet of living area. So it says 2 bedrooms, not be less than 340, okay, so 1 bedroom, 300, 340 for a 2 bedroom, but the maximum is set at 1,200 square feet.
That's pretty big.
And
That's a
then
good
Gail had brought that up previously, like what's an existing
Yeah.
structure, accessory structure in a house, or a little bit larger than that, and one of these goes to 513, like, could there be some flexibility in the regulation? So that's a question to the board, whether or not you want to increase that, you know, for any new or existing structures, or should there be, you know, a maximum, but some flexibility in the cases of existing structures. So that's one question, but yeah, I mean, I agree, if you're gonna go a third bedroom, then maybe you can go a little larger than 1,200, so.
You really, yeah. well,
1,200 square foot
do you
apartment,
want
that's
us to
pretty
comment
big.
as we go along?
Yeah.
Yeah, you do.
Because if you don't mind me chiming in, because that's what I'd love to do.
Please.
I think, I know 2 cases definitively, without doing any research, on 2 families who were ready to make their accessory structure into a 513. Their existing structures, one was built in the 90s, one was built in the 1800s. But they could not apply because they were too big. One had too many bedrooms, one had like 1,300 square feet. And there was a family who wanted to offer this accessory structure to this other family, and one, they had, 2 children, and there was 1 bedroom where they couldn't have 2, whatever the situation was. The restriction on bedrooms and square footage, I would like to see that numbers of bedrooms and square footage of accessory structures just follow the zoning requirements. You have to make sure your septic capacity can withstand the number of people that are allowed on the property, and that you are within the zoning regulations and not exceeding your building square footage. I don't see because if you don't allow the accessory to be a 513, those people can use that existing dwelling to rent both structures to 12 people. If the property can withstand 12 people per septic and building lot coverage, that's what they're gonna do. But these people actually wanted to separate that, it was already a separated structure. They wanted to rent it to a family, and they couldn't.
Well, I think you
So they
could,
rent the whole property to 12, so it's
Gotcha.
12 or 12.
Right.
so, but
And
I,
typically you find, and sometimes you find that when you have a property that's rented with a family living on it or owners living in it, you don't end up with the big party atmosphere. You have a more, there's more awareness going on for both parties, because the accessory people living with the year-round people living in accessory structure don't want to blow their chances of losing their accommodations. And the people in the rental dwelling here for the week don't want to ruin their chances of coming back next year. So everyone's just a little tamer and more, at least from my experience, but,
What would the downside, is there a downside?
That's what I wonder. What's the downside of it?
Anybody have any, what's the downside?
well, I don't know about that, but what I wanted to say was, the problem of having 3 bedrooms when they can only rent a 2-bedroom is pretty easy to fix. Like, you can change a bedroom into a living room or something, and it's just not use the bedroom, right? And I think, but
No,
in terms of the size, that I'm agnostic on. So,
but the
Yeah.
The idea really is,
who said that?
does it become just a second? I mean. It's full size, that's like 2 to 1 house. I mean,
Close to 2 summonses, but they're both duplicated.
Who is that? Oh.
So the town's rate is an accessory, so it's supposed to be smaller in scale.
Yeah.
Once you get into a 3-bedroom that has no limit on size, then it's almost like a second single family.
And we're not talking footprint, we're talking all square footage, so.
Well,
this
also the number of
upstairs was one
bedrooms.
Studio, and then there was a garage down below.
I understand, but
And then
it's-
the utility area here, so the only area they could utilize, because the building was 1,200 square feet, they could only utilize this living area. The garage was included and so was the utility,
well,
so.
it says living area.
Yeah, the garage should be,
Yeah,
you could build a garage, you put an apartment above it, it's 1,200 square feet, and still have a garage below.
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Doesn't have
So
a
what-
plan.
Why would that be defined as an apartment?
It is.
It is.
What, I'm sorry, Alice, what did you say? You said,
Well, the concept of allowing for unlimited square footage and a 3-bedroom home, like, I was just trying to give the alternative, when you guys were saying, what's the downside?
yeah,
To me, it seems like it's getting into almost allowing 2 single family homes on one structure, like
Mhm.
double the density, anyone can just build a second house.
But they can't sell it, they can't,
Yeah.
it's still an accessory, it has to be
but
lower in
it's, yeah,
height.
it's in a 513 program.
It doesn't necessarily
You're-
have the building lot coverage, but what is frustrating for me is these structures are here.
So maybe we want
to
to
turn them into this and they can't.
What
Well, I
about no new building, larger, 2 bedrooms or smaller? But in an existing structure, we would consider with a special use permit coming and considering 3 bedrooms and maybe 1,300 square feet or something like that. I do think it needs a limit. But
then,
I was going to say a special use permit might be a vehicle for this consideration.
that way, if because I think, see Gail's point, that way, if there's an existing structure already built, it could be converted to a 513, but I certainly wouldn't want a new one constructed because I think then it gets into Allison's scenario of 2 houses.
but you're gonna have that anyway. If I may be the devil's advocate, you're gonna.
Please
have-
do. We're
People
just-
are allowed to build the second dwelling, they're allowed to build the second structure.
You're not exceeding
Accessory
the lot.
residential structure, is that what you mean?
Yeah,
And it's not limited in
and it's
size.
not limited in size, and it's not limited in bedrooms, and so if you have enough property that you can have a 3,000 square foot main house and a 1,800 square foot accessory structure, but you can't have anyone live in it year round, they're just gonna use it for themselves and rent it to their,
Well, like Margie said,
to
is
the population.
if we made an avenue for them to like say, this is what we want to do and just,
I don't see.
I
why
don't
you
see-
deter it, though. That's kind of what I'm.
Right.
Right,
that's
I don't
what
think
you-
right, like,
Over
I
all
think
these
you're
years,
right,
we're
you're
seeing this
punishing-
as a deterrent.
Well, no,
Encouraging this use and, but the accessory residential structure, there's no limit on size, and no limit on number of them.
yeah.
And so is that more of an issue versus?
And also,
The issue is
the fact it's
we're,
a 2-bedroom apartment, how many family, because I mean, there's a housing shortage.
yeah,
Yeah, we
And
all know
I don't
that.
know what part of that housing shortage, year-round housing shortage, is for families. I
Right.
mean, I think it's,
I think it's a pretty large number.
I think it's a large number and,
right.
and.
2 bedroom doesn't accommodate.
You know, a 2-bedroom apartment doesn't, you can't accommodate I guess, I'm in agreement with Gail, I just don't, I wanna see the downside. The downside is, are you gonna have someone's gonna build another structure on the property, despite the fact that they can legally build another structure on the property. But just to build it and then rent it out by the week, or build it and offer it to your, like, what's the
Well-
downside?
Chris, I was thinking, and Gail, I was referring to the idea of using existing structures, but to Allison's point about it, are we gonna, these larger accessory structures, new larger accessory structures, you know, and we were just talking about whether or not we're going to include that in the large house calculations or not, you know. So do we want to encourage people to build larger accessory structures that are going to be affordable? Or do we do have a program, we are providing homes for a number of families, home ownership for a number of families and in our current program, but we don't have a lot of rentals. So we do need some rentals, but you know, I'm just trying to balance out the massing with the need for the housing.
I think you could probably go to 500 square feet of living area and a 3 bedroom. Because then they have the option to.
No,
500.
50. I think she means 15.
100 square feet of 3 bedrooms, it doesn't,
I don't understand why it can't be in, like, we're trying to simplify our zoning ordinances. Why can't this be a component of that simplification, which is you basically can only do what your zoning ordinance allows in the form of accessory structure? Because one thing you have to consider is today, people could be building their house and their accessory because they have the family and they want all that. And then they sell it. And that guy says, well, I really want a caretaker. Oh, I have a caretaker who has 3 kids. Great. I have accessory structure that will allow him to do it. When is
But it doesn't
that?
qualify because it's too big.
So.
And it's new and it's, you know, so when,
But can I ask what would prevent him
But
from
that
renting it to that person here anyway?
Yeah,
well, they're cracking down on the 513s. They want people,
But
because
is it
people would
considered
qualify.
513? If it's,
anybody qualifies, they just wouldn't.
No,
this isn't the affordable.
It'll
Oh,
be
It's
too
too
big.
large. Well, I mean, we've had applicants come in and maybe make a room that was storage and not living.
yeah,
Yeah,
they
but we
can
don't
change
wanna-
the,
We don't want to do that.
Why not?
We want to inspire people to be able to use their structures as they were built. Or allow people who have no interest in having that accessory structure be 513, but allow the next family to do that, or the next owner. You know what I mean?
I mean,
No.
if they're not exceeding lot coverage, they're gonna build like.
They're gonna build
they're
whatever
gonna
they
build it
want.
Anyway, or build something.
So isn't the,
Take
let's back up a little bit, so the accessory residential structure we're talking about, no kitchen is allowed in that.
Correct.
Versus this section, you do have to have a kitchen, so that's like, it's like a second dwelling unit on a property, so that's why the regulations are. a
Oh, I
little bit
understand, but
different.
most of the accessory structures that are built today have a really big open living area that you could readily incorporate a kitchen into in the future. A lot of them
Oh,
have
that'd be illegal.
cabinetry, they're legal because they don't have cooking and they don't have, they're,
Right,
you know,
yeah.
but they're there for people to be able to stay and sleep and make some coffee in the morning and, you know.
Yeah. I
Do
mean,
the outdoor
and
kitchen.
you're getting to, it's borderline appropriate, right? I mean, if we look at those and we're like, we see the cabinetry, and it is a concern, because it's not the intention of the ordinance.
And that isn't
yeah.
supposed to be there.
Right.
But like, for example, like your house is 1,500 square feet of living space, Chris. So that's the size of
a 3 bedroom.
1,500 square feet of living.
And I
space.
have 4 people living in it and I can't, like, it's not big.
Well,
I have 2 dogs, a turtle, 2 fish.
the turtle that put you over.
Instructions of what you can do, what you can't do, when you can stay.
Yeah.
12 people in a house, on a property.
It's not,
It's 12
it's not
people.
a hardship.
Why are we restricting the ability to have attainable housing? If the structure can be there, because again, and even if people build these structures originally, their kids move on, never come to Long Island anymore, then they say, well, let's see if we can go to town and put a kitchen in there and have our own living room there.
Allison,
But
I
if
have
they
a
wanna build
question.
it And it's too big, they're thrown out the window, so I'm just trying to.
I have a question.
Try to have
I
a.
mean, I agree with the 3
the
bedroom,
future.
1,500.
And I'd like to see the future.
I could go with
I
that
think
too.
the OWTS might be the roadblock for a lot of.
Well, and you had,
Situation.
you said you're cramped with 1,500 with 2 kids, what if
It's
a
not
couple?
enough, it's just minimal.
What if a child, you know, a family comes in and they have 4 children, and they wanna live here year round and can't buy a house and can't rent a place?
Can I ask a question?
You just-
On-
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
All right.
So sorry.
On these accessory apartments, is there the lot requirement? It has to be 6 acres, right? Or it has to be enough, like, no, so they can have, only if it's affordable, they get a waiver from that, no?
So I asked you earlier, Jack.
Yeah.
Is there a lot coverage exemption if you put a 513 on?
I thought, I was told, because I've asked, in the past, I've asked about this, and I was told I had to have enough, as if I had 2 lots.
That's for,
It's-
that's secondary
That's
dwelling.
secondary, though, yeah, that's a secondary.
I was told
dwelling.
it was the same for the 513. No? Okay.
But you do have to comply with your setbacks and your lot building coverage. But
So-
you could have, if you have a small house and you want to build an accessory structure and put a garage on the first floor and an apartment on the second floor, which we've seen numerous times, and you have the coverage and the setbacks, but you, I mean, you only have 1 acre lot, you can do it.
That's where my concern is, because these, as these properties transfer, this is, you're getting to have 2 kitchens on a lot that doesn't usually, wouldn't normally get to have 2 kitchens. And then the 513 is abandoned, or the property transfers ownership, and, is it, and so what happens to the kitchen, and that's, and you're left with this big house, a big second house on the property.
You're still allowed to do it, though. You're still within your, what I'm saying is you're allowed to do that anyway.
Build a second kitchen?
No.
No, the second dwelling.
Like, you're not, as I understand it.
You can put a guest house
If you were
in.
to do this 513, and this is, and I have the same concern that Christina has. What bothers me is they go through the 513 process and then they abandon it down the line.
That's the concern.
That's
But
the problem.
when I found out that there
They're
is
allowed to
not,
do it anyway.
you're not given any, if you're not given any exception to lot coverage because you're doing this. So we're not breaking it, you're not bending any rules.
Except for the kitchen.
Right, and then if the 513 is abandoned, you gotta take the kitchen out.
Does that
You
happen?
have to take the cooking facilities out.
You have to take the kitchen out.
And it also refers to kitchen it refers to plumbing, and that was one of my other notes that I made to the board for tonight was you have to take the plumbing out, but you don't have to take the sink out.
No, you could have
So
the
that's
sink.
language that we could
Yeah, we
look at.
should look at that because I think the idea.
I mean, that's the old, the abandoning the 513 is my big hang with this in general. I'm not worried about, as long as you're in compliance with your lot coverage. 1 or 2 or 3, whatever it is, I don't have a problem with it. I want to encourage any apartments over garages to be used for year-round housing, that's otherwise they're just gonna be used for weekly rentals. It's the abandonment component that I'm not thrilled with, and I don't know how many that actually applies to now.
We see them from time to time. I mean, I think that needs to be really strong and clear, like what the process is and really what you need to remove. And then the deed restriction is in the affordability part of this and not in the accessory apartment.
Mhm.
So I think putting the deed restriction so that if you sell your property and then, the next person sells it, it's at least it's in the land evidence records, and if the file disappears or something, we know that it's there. Because I know when Tom Reeson was going out and doing some of these inspections, I wasn't really involved in it, but they kept looking for deed restrictions. Well, some of them don't have them. Because
they're not in
the deed
compliance.
restriction was in the original 406, if I remember correctly.
Right, and there's supposed to be a lease in the file, right? We just-
Yes, the leases are supposed to be in there and an inspection process. So that, you could allow them to get a little bit larger if you were really comfortable that they were gonna remain year round.
And I think it would have to
I
be,
have to keep drifting back to that they can build the building anyway and use the structure as they see fit to add to their main house, to rent to now 12 people instead of 8 and 4 or 6 and 6.
But
Why do we
are they
care?
allowed to rent? Like, I don't.
to
Yeah,
12,
No, why
An
accessories?
accessory.
No,
if
accessories.
you're renting with the same
Oh,
family,
yeah.
all together. This is all people all
They're
together.
just
The whole
bedrooms.
house.
Yeah.
yeah, they're veterans.
But the septic, this is where I have.
That's what I refer to as the septic has to comply. You
Mhm.
can't just build a 4-bedroom house and have a 3-bedroom septic on your property. That's,
Bedroom driven.
yeah.
And I think it would be, oh boy, I just lost it. Oh,
I think the benefit.
I'll tell you when I remember.
is, like, I understand
what Christine was saying with lot coverage, but the reality is people are allowed to do it. But we're not, it's not a special use permit. You're allowed to build 2,000 square feet and you have the room to do it. You want to put another dwelling on, you want to put a garage in. Like, they're either gonna do it and offer the, like, via this route, because expand the qualifications to 1,500 and 3 bedrooms, if that's gonna encourage a couple, 2, 3 more availability apartments that are available, or it's just gonna, like you said, Gail, we're just gonna turn it into
Another restriction.
another rental, but instead of, and septic, and mind you, this is all saying all the rules are being followed with septic and everything else on the zoning. But your 3-bedroom rental just turned into a 6-bedroom, or a 5-bedroom rental, 6-bedroom rental. But, you know, because you're not using you're not going down the affordable route.
Right.
The outbuilding is for the kids, right? That's what, you rent a house, there's an outbuilding that has 2 bedrooms, that's where you're throwing the kids.
I think
And
if-
I'd rather see more 513s.
I remember what I was gonna say is that maybe it should also say like no variances on setbacks and things, so if they, so that you can't like say, oh, well, I want to build a secondary structure, but I need to go into a setback, or I need to, you know, a variance on this or that.
Yeah,
So,
well, variances are hard unless you have a hardship anyway, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
have to have a hardship for the accessory structure to get the variance.
right,
But that's a
so,
great point, because
The other question if we could.
Hardship.
The idea of how many are permitted per lot, this is something that's kind of been confused, right? Jenny mentioned that the zoning board had this question, but, there's, as far as commercial, it doesn't really specify a maximum number of 513s on one lot. There's this language that says, you know, needing a separate affidavit for each accessory apartment, so to me, that means you could have more than one 513 in a commercial zoning district.
Yes, and that's what they decided, that the zoning board, that they were questioning,
Yeah.
because the language
hmm,
isn't really clear.
Well, we
But
don't,
for Lark Hotels, they did approve 2 513s.
and that, you know, we just came across a situation where there was a hotel with a back building, and the owner wanted to convert it to, it would be 3 apartments for year-round, 4 513, but you're only allowed 2.
So that, yeah, so within the subsection, no accessory apartment shall be permitted if the result would be a residential density of more than 2 dwelling units per lot within those residential zoning districts. So
Mhm.
there is a maximum, right? So basically saying you have a single family and then you have 1 513, you can't have more than 2 dwelling units. But then in commercial zones, it's not specifying a maximum, so we just bring that to your attention to think about what is that?
And I think I need to bring to your attention that it was determined that it could be for seasonal, so you could end up having a property owner in the Old Harbor Commercial District create 513s, but they're only gonna be rented seasonally.
so that's employee housing. Right,
Which is.
which we don't have an ordinance.
Discourage either.
Well, some employee housing, yeah, but I think,
You need that too, but.
but
you
then are
also
they
gotta
gonna turn
protect
that
your
into a
neighbors.
hotel?
Well, then you end up with
No, not
Yeah,
necessarily,
but,
we
Yeah.
can't keep deterring
There's
still
still,
housing, and I think
I don't
that's
think
what
we-
this ordinance right
and even
now
if you
does.
have a restaurant next door
I
to
did
it.
like it's
You still don't want a lot of noise.
one person, maybe, one person.
Anyway,
The one spot I like the special use permit, because I hate having all these next steps, but the one place I thought maybe the special use permit was relevant is for more than 2. Because then they could come to us and say they already exist, the building's already there, I have, 3 employees that live here year round, they're gonna be living there, all those matters can come into play instead of just, no, you can't do that.
as a tool to create more seasonal housing.
Seasonal and year round, yeah.
Well, for
Is that
the-
residential and commercial zoning, or you talking about what's not?
Commercial?
commercial.
Well, any of the mixed, commercial, RC and mixed use is where I've seen it the most.
And it gets you up to R3.
Not RA or RV.
Case by case.
Or RC.
RC, any of those that weren't, every other zone but RA and RV is where I've seen most of the cases that we just have to say, nope, you're not gonna be able to do it.
I would support an SUP. I would support that.
To allow more unit, more fire teams within,
More
to
than
exceed the two.
Just exceed the two, they'd have to come for a special.
But also your earlier point, to allow for a larger structure.
In our area,
Yeah,
Yeah, you could do that.
I could support that if you had a special use permit.
Yeah.
Process as especially.
Otherwise, I don't think I can.
Or new and existing.
Yeah, for,
Are you saying more than two on a residential lot?
And building size.
Someone really wants to do it, they could create it for their children. And it's 4 bedrooms and it's 2,000 square feet and they have a way to do that.
Could you set a percentage differential? You want the main house to be 100%, for example, and the smaller house to be at 20, so that it looks appropriate.
yes,
Some kind of percentage differential for that footprint.
But then you're discount or alleviating the ability to have the buildings that are already there and or the people who build it this year, but then sell it and the next person wants it as a 513. If we have too much criteria attached, there's too many applications that can get thrown out.
I agree.
Well,
Are we talking about, which zone are we talking about right now?
Right, probably.
All the
like
zones except for
that
RA and RD.
Most homes, when they build an accessory building, that accessory building isn't 20% bigger than the main house.
Mhm.
You want to set some kind of percentage differential.
Then you really
Yeah.
have to go to zoning and have it all, well, this is all zoning stuff, but you'd have to have it all in the same ordinance, because what we're trying to do is simplify ordinances a bit too, so that people aren't having to go to 5 different sections to determine what they can build. And then, but if you do want to do 513, well, then you want to do it this way, but what if I don't want to do 513? I'm not sure, so I'm not going to do that. Okay, I'll do the big one.
Yes.
I just want to point out, if you go to C3, that's the section that says, that is in there right now.
That's crossed out.
And it, right, so, but right now it exists, and without regard to the residential density requirements, when someone asked, I think it was Soja asked the question, Christine, about, like, does that mean you have to have 6 acres? in residential?
So why is it crossed out?
Well, I think that was, so,
What is 3 and 4?
Well, that should be
really telling
crossed out.
us that? I didn't know the purpose of 3 and 4.
No, because then it's still bigger than zoning wise.
well, it's density, which would be, the density would be how many dwellings you can have on the lot. So this is allowing you to have it, if you have 1 acre, a 1 acre lot, and comply with building lot coverage and your setbacks, you could have this. So if you take this out, now in the residential A zone, you have to have 6 acres to have one. Because that's how I interpret it, because of density, the word density is what you would look at for the number of.
Well, that's in,
Is density people or units?
that's in public sewer, it says. This is where it has public
But
sewer.
if it's allowed by right and within this ordinance, it says you can have 2 dwelling units. I don't see why that those sentences are necessary, but. I mean, if it's not hurting anything, I just was trying to simplify it, I wasn't trying to change the policy. I just didn't see why it was necessary. Because, you know, it says a farm shall be permitted as a result with the residential density of more than 2 dwelling units per lot, and saying it's allowed by right within the zoning district.
But then if you go back to the dimensional standards and that, then which is the density, like the density is in there under like 306. You would look at that and think, well, how am I going to put another dwelling, or how am I going to put another structure? Because you still have to comply with the dimensional standards of that section. You're not allowing people to put it 1 foot from the property line, so. I think it's, okay.
We can retain that, yeah, if you think it's gonna be an issue, so.
Okay.
No, but it really needs revision, and I really appreciate the time to go over all this, because I see
Kristen
way
wanna
too much, far too many people turning away the idea because they just can't. Right now.
Is that true?
Yeah, and I see what Gail's saying, but I'm also saying that we've got to have some limits.
Yeah.
Because these properties are all going to be surrounded by neighbors, and we have to protect them too. You can't, you buy your property and you own it, and all of a sudden you get 2 accessory apartments that appear that were not there when you bought your house. So we do need to protect the neighbors too. Kristen, you've been very patient. I will have to say, I thank you for your patience.
You're welcome. Really. You know, I know you're all getting tired and I'm about to throw, you know, I'm about to lob you a ball, but I hope you'll have a little bit of time and patience for me. I'd like to let you know that I've been scratching at something for a while now, many months, and I started with some counselors and I ended up in Tom Rism's office, and Jen is always generous with her time, and I hired an attorney. And so here I am. Little did I know, I just had to come to the planning board. I would have done that months ago. But I would like to suggest that 513s be allowed to be ownable, to be separate ownership. I think that preserves the 513. As someone who's selling their property and owns a 513, it is the first question any potential buyer asks me when they walk in the door. How do I get that off the books? How do I get to live in that? Number one question. And of course that breaks my heart, you know, and I say, you can't, you know, you can't, it's a 513. And I think we all know that when the housing board has a lottery, many, many people walk out that door without ownership. And that if we allowed 513s to be owned, there would be some more people that had year-round housing on Block Island and could own it. I'm not suggesting that every 513 owner would put their house for sale. Some would still be rentals, which we know is also an important part of the housing problem on Block Island. We do need 513s to be rentable. But I think ownership allows for perpetuity, that then does become deed restricted, that they then do always have a Block Island family in them. I think by default, by size, by 2 bedrooms or 3, by 1,200 square feet or 1,500, they will be default, always attainable. What other places with housing crisis call workforce housing. That's a term they use, So instead of affordable or attainable, so should they use workforce housing? It would become workforce housing that people could participate in on this island. And I think, talk about restrictive, I think by not allowing this, we're not setting people up to follow the rules, right? They do rent them weekly. They aren't following the rules. They are taking them off the 513 books. We are losing them every single year. We're losing 513s. They are taking out their kitchens. They don't care. They'll take that kitchen out. They just want that building, right? So we're losing 513s. We're losing opportunities for people to live on this island. And it's not what it's not what our intentions are, and it's not what our policies say. Incremental change to the housing situation is part of the comprehensive plan, and this would create incremental change.
Kristen, how would that work? So you would, when you say available for ownership, like what are you envisioning?
So I live near a bunch of condos. So when I was told that I couldn't condoize my property, I was like, huh? I live next door to 5 or 6 of them. And there's some at the pharmacy, and there's some in the Marine building, and the Sheffield house across the street from me has a separate unit. And like, what do you mean I can't do that? So the simplification of how it stands now is and you all understand this, this is nothing, I'm not teaching you anything here, but I don't have enough land to subdivide, and you can't condoize a 513. So I'm suggesting that they become that you could condoize them.
Thank you.
Similar to other, we have done this in other places. Let me see if I tell you, and I understand the legality of these examples. I understand that somewhere in there, I kind of fell in this weird hole where I didn't get to do this, but across the street from the Dulacs, there's separate, right? That's separate ownership. Molly Price's old house. I don't know how to describe this, but right. So that's separate ownership. Across the street from me at the Sheffield House is separate ownership. There's 2 buildings there. So, you know, I would say condoizing them would be an option. So let me just see, I wrote a couple notes. So I think it retains the 513s. I think we can save them. I think it gives people a chance and an opportunity to follow the rules, that they do rent them weekly, that they don't all go to year-round people, that by doing this, you can provide the owner with some income. And then that house is a 513 still, right? Like you've allowed them to sell it. Or to examples that Bill was saying and Gail was agreeing with, I think you were agreeing with, or the owner moves into the 513 and they get to sell their big house. And then that's income for them and an opportunity for them to stay on this island and contribute and so on. I mentioned that it's the incremental change that the comp plan describes. I don't think it changes your work here, although I've been listening and I know you want to change this work. But I say like the 513s, all the rules stay the same, right? Like, so they exist, they already exist. You're not changing density. The future ones could exist in a different way, but you would still follow your size and change things, right? Like I'm not suggesting changes to that. So size doesn't change, placement doesn't change. As I said, people could do it as an option. Chris.
So as I understand it, your lot coverage or your lot size, you can't subdivide.
Correct.
And does that go by zone?
And just to remind you that you do have a section 405 that does allow homeownership, because it allows the creation of year-round affordable single-family dwellings. So you might want to look at that section.
So the reason we were told you couldn't create a condo is because of within this zoning section, it states that it has to be held in single joint.
Yes.
Undivided ownership.
Right. So that would be, that is the change I'm requesting.
So if that sentence was removed, then people could create condos from,
If they're affordable.
And maybe doesn't weigh in on this, but like the state regulates condos, right? We don't, the town and the planning board, we have no control or review over anyone that wants to create, make their property into condos. We don't review that, don't regulate that.
I don't think they have
Except for
jurisdiction,
here.
but-
We do a little, it depends on the section.
Yeah, I don't think the state have, I think it's a state regulation, the town can't control ownership, they can just control use, but from what I understand, it was originally created because they didn't want people then converting that 513 into a regular house, and then it was sold by somebody else. Now you have double density, you have 2 completely different families living on a property that neither one of which live year round. So how could you restrict the property so that when it does sell, that 513 person moves along, do they then have to sell it to a 513?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think
So
you
it
have
stays
to,
in 513 in
Those are the
perpetuity.
affordable houses.
Yeah.
So that's what 405 is, that's how.
Right.
405, so, okay.
Have been created, because then the lot size doesn't matter as much, because you're.
So would that be a solution for her?
No, because the main house needs to have enough land to support that structure as a market value structure, and then the second structure.
Oh, I see.
So and that happens, like Ellen Jackie's project,
Yes.
that's an example of where there was enough land to do that, so you could create those other lots, and then the market value structure had conformed to the zoning ordinance.
Secure 3 acres for them.
Yeah, she had to remain, but that all had to be conforming in order to create that.
Oh, gotcha.
Jen, was that the case with Jill too? Jill Cullen?
She has, what did she have?
First, she had that one structure was.
No, she had a 513, now it's just an accessory to the to the property. She had when she built her house, she built a cottage down below, and then there was a long vacant building. That was a 513, but then when she could convert it back.
Right.
And now it's just an accessory, doesn't really have a kitchen.
Is there a way of selling the 513 piece and then it being a leased land and the ownership is still for the primary house and they have the acreage for that house?
No, we went through that and it's an absolute nightmare. You can't do that. You have to have condominium ownership. And so your building is owned. You can have 2 condominiums, or 3 condominiums, and a condominium is, and I'm speaking out of turn, we should have Bill Landry comment.
Yeah, I was thinking.
But no, we tried to sell a leased land situation and it was an absolute nightmare. And they converted it to condominium and so you could actually sell it.
So if Kristen's property was a prior existing non-conforming use and there were 2 dwellings existing, back in before zoning, then she would have the ability to condo it. And that's how the properties that you're referring to were able to do that, because they were prior existing multiple units there. But and that does happen. There's condos. If you take a look at the tax maps, there are condos around, all around, and because they could exist.
Well, the one on Center Road, because they were prior existing, the kitchens were built prior to zoning.
Right.
Emily Reed, remember?
Ooh, that's a tricky one. You're gonna go there?
Yeah,
But you know what? Yes, this affects me personally, for sure. But I only offer that is that I live it, right? And these buyers are asking me that, and I'm a 25-year resident and I've been a town employee for 20 years. So, I think it's important to provide housing for me. But I get that it's not about me. I really do. On serious note, I will probably sell my property before this is doable and I'll be gone. And that's not a threat or anything. That's just the way it's going to go. But I think for the future, it is bigger than me. This is bigger than me. This is about 55 to 513s, 55 513s, 44 unionized town employees. Like you could potentially have, housing for employees. And there are people that service we could maybe even get a plumber to live here. Or, who knows who could live here if we did this.
it's an interesting conversation to have, but if you want to create the rentals, which is what this section does,
I think,
then this part needs to be in a different
right,
section.
I
that
agree
maybe
with
have
you, I like the concept,
a lot
I
of
don't
review.
think it's necessarily, the
But it's
concept of
just that one
personal
sentence though,
Yeah.
but it is just that one sentence. It's actually could be one word, right? You could add in condoize.
Right, but
Instead
now
of
you have
individual.
50 units that could be sold, and they're not
Yeah.
rentals, and what if someone's in one of those that couldn't qualify for a mortgage, or they make too much money, it's sort of this.
It has to fall under
Sustainable.
the potato affordable housing stuff.
Right. but you-
Right.
We don't want to
probably
displace
have
anybody.
people living in
Yeah.
those units now that wouldn't meet the income, maybe they make too much, or maybe they have no desire to own something, and now the property owner wants to sell it, so you're gonna take away the rental of it.
Aspect. That's where,
Listen, I get that. I just displaced 4 families with the sale of my home. It's a heartbreaker. But I don't think all 55 would sell. I think you would retain some rentals. But I think you would also create some home ownership for families.
And I think we could do that using the other section, not taking away from the rental part of it.
I would say let's put that aside for right now, because I do agree that I think it goes in a different section, although it is very intriguing. And let's try to finish this so that we can feel like we've accomplished something for the day.
But it is what you're
you're doing.
Yeah.
Right? It is what you're doing right now. You're
Yeah.
about to present something to the council that is right for this, right? They want to work on housing.
Where's that
Yeah.
line she's
And
talking
it
about?
will be a couple of, we're not ready yet, but it will be within the next several months. But I think we certainly should make a note to go back and look at, was it 406?
405.
Yeah, whatever. I get the numbers all mixed
All
up.
the restrictions in there and all of that.
And look at that as a possibility. So put that into your notes for to do for beginning of next year.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure, go ahead.
I promise it'll be quick, because it kind of relates to this. I don't, from what I understand, an owner can't live in their 513, is that correct?
That's my understanding.
Right, and that's another thing that I was gonna suggest to be
Right.
thrown out. I think
That makes
owners
sense
should
to
be
me.
allowed to be their 513. So thinking about that as we continue these conversations.
Wait a minute, you've lost.
I think an owner of a building should be allowed to move into their accessory and be their own 513, so they can afford their property. So they can rent their main house weekly in the summer, live there in the winter, and then move back into their garage apartment in the summer. So that they can,
Then you're not a 513.
well, I know, that's what I mean. So that's, I think an owner should be able to be a 513, part of the 513
Then
process.
you can't have, you would,
Yeah.
out of those 50, you probably wouldn't have very many.
We're able to do that.
who This would not provide your own.
The only
No,
way that
I
would
guess what
work,
I'm saying is there's a lot of, I know a lot of owners now who move into their accessory structures and rent in the summer.
Yeah,
But they're
so
not,
they're already
it's not
doing it.
legitimate.
That's not allowed, right.
right, but you're,
And it would be another way to get people who live here year round to create income for themselves. In
right,
order
you're
to
talking about
maintain and
people
keep the
creating
property.
income by renting out their main house for 10 times the amount that they would rent their accessory apartment out. And that doesn't make any, it doesn't become a 513 then.
Well,
It becomes,
I'm just,
I think you're undermining a program here. I don't want to do
I mean,
that.
I understand what you're saying, Gail, but.
I don't, but do undermine the
That's
program.
my point about allowing people the opportunity to follow the rules.
Yeah.
That's exactly my point. If they could condoize them and live in their 513 and sell their big house, then they could live here. That's my point about, like, because they're not legitimate right now. They are breaking the rules. And I think allowing them to own it and separate them, or they stay in their big house and the 299,000 that they get from the 513 means they're also not breaking the rules. That gives them that income so that they don't have to live in their 513 and rent their big house. That's what ownership does. It keeps the 513 alive and it keeps it as an affordable workforce housing situation, as opposed to people cheating and flipping and moving around.
I'll summarize my thoughts, because I don't want you to think I'm undermining any systems or trying to
No, I
do
want you
anything
to-
safer. I'll summarize my thoughts, so we don't have to further digest it here, but I'll put it on paper so you can
Yeah.
better understand my point.
Is that, when you do that, can you clarify whether or not that other building is going to be year-round housing or seasonal housing?
Oh,
That's the difference in when I was, when you said what you said, I was like,
Oh, that's seasonal. Yeah.
well, it'd be different if it was like, all right, your 4-bedroom or 5-bedroom or 6-bedroom house is gonna be rented to a year-round family, I'm just gonna stay in my accessory structure as, the quote unquote 513. Then I'm like, all right, it's a wash, but if you're saying, a retired couple is gonna go stay in their 513 and rent their house out for quote unquote income, like, I
In
don't.
exchange for losing the year-round.
In exchange for, exactly, you already have a year-round home.
Right, because you could leave the island for the summer, rent your house, and
Sure.
then come back and live in your home all winter and still rent that home, but you'd still have a year-round apartment on it.
Wow. I'm
I'll
tired.
clarify.
Okay,
I'll clarify what I see.
Right?
okay, what else, Allison, do we have to finish on this?
Can we
You can
table
pick it up.
I think we went through the main points of this, were some question marks, so, yeah, I guess we're gonna take a little more time with this, so I will digest the notes and
Yeah,
get back to you next month, we'll talk to
okay,
the housing board and look at those other sections, get some more information for you. for next
okay.
month, some changes, so that we'll make helping.
And I think we need to just state, these people are listening to our meeting, that living in an accessory residential unit and renting out your house is illegal, because you're supposed to rent your accessory residential structure with your house.
Correct.
Okay, good point. Okay, so I'll mark this for January. Okay. Number 3. We could roll this over until.
This was to talk about, this is something, that- yeah. We
Please.
had had this on the agenda before, but this was almost like there was a couple of recommendations to look at other sections of the zoning ordinance that might be a priority. So this would be the opportunity for planning board members to voice whether or not there's other zoning sections we should look at. And then the other thing that has come up was about the zoning, we talked about this earlier, the building official title within the zoning ordinance. In most cases, probably needs to be changed to zoning official, so, we've talked about that, and we talked with Bill and, Kathy Marola, so that's something, yeah, I'll let you speak about what the next steps are from that.
We just had asked the question, and Allison did a search, and it was about things over 100 places in the ordinance, so it's building officials, so 80 of them have to change to zoning official, then kind of the amendment process and how to advertise a document that isn't. Yeah. So.
Hence the
you do
conversation
that.
at the very beginning.
But it sounds like, Bill and, Captain Rose said we could do that with an amendment. Like.
And then
without
codify it?
Right, without advertising the entire document.
Okay,
So maybe we pull out, but unfortunately, you have to go through one by one, and identify maybe where there does need to be the building official title, and it's just. List of exclusions, but that's something you, with the planning board, we should still have the planning board look at that, not just go to the town council, or what is the
I think we
recommended
should
process?
probably
If they're gonna. need to make
pull out the
recommendations.
words building official, like identify where building official stays in ordinance, and then give that language to the planning board to put on their next agenda, so that the word zoning official is, in all of the other locations, however, we word that.
Yeah, so it will go to the planning board, maybe next month, we'll have that. And
Well,
then-
they have to give a recommendation to the
Yeah.
town council. So if we can do that next month, and then it could go to the town council for a public hearing.
okay.
Yeah, so just kind of a heads up on that, so we'll work on that. It's more administrative than policy level stuff.
But we've got enough on our plate for a while.
Yeah,
And then lighting, I know, outdoor lighting has come up.
Yeah.
yeah, I think that should be one of the first.
Yeah, I
First
did,
ones.
I did address it
Um,
in my
We wanna look at
notes.
that, I know, Mary mentioned that.
And- No, Mary's been very patient on that for, it's been at least a year.
Hmm.
I also think we want to look at wetland setbacks and buffers.
Yeah.
Certainly,
I'm waiting on the state to come out with something.
all right, then let's put that kind of on the back burner for right this minute.
I'm waiting for them to get more guidance with the towns, and I also read that they just bumped back the effective date. They made it later.
Thank you, Kristen.
Thanks,
So-
Judy.
Bye, Kristen.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's hold up till I learn more about any resources or, yeah, so it's on my radar. but
Okay.
The lighting should be relatively easy, I think.
Yeah, sure.
Nothing. Don't say that, don't jinx it.
Pretty simple. It's
Okay.
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 Mm.
They're all on timers, they go off at 10.
With a siren, don't forget.
I got a couple other things that we can think about. I think our mixed use, maybe we want to take a look at that zone. Some of the things we've talked about wanting to change it because it seems to be moving somewhat in the more commercial area. So I think we ought to take a look at that and tie that also in with commercial. I've had several people say it would be nice if there was some more commercial area. That there is no, for example, there's no place really for another garage for
Okay.
repairs.
Mhm.
So we might just want to look and see if there is other areas that might be considered for commercial. I don't think it's a high priority, but it's certainly something we should be looking at.
Okay.
And I have had requests from a couple of potential people who might want to do something in a commercial zone. My last question is, and I can't remember, did we ever decide on doing something with flexible design
No,
about
we
changing a
didn't.
couple?
I've been bugging. I've been
Okay, then
bugging.
let's ask, again, it's not a high priority, but
And that's a
certainly,
quickie.
certainly take a look at flexible design and update it some.
What's the quick change?
Huh?
You said that's a quickie, what's the quick change on that one?
Well, right now, when we are looking at a subdivision or.
Yeah. It's
We
50%, 50% for,
Open space.
yeah, green open space.
But
And we found that really does not appear to work. We've been approving things that are more 25 to 30% open space. So I think that's something we want to look at and see whether or not we might want to change it. And remind me, was there anything else?
Yeah. We are still requiring an applicant to come in with 2 plans for a traditional subdivision, which they can do by right. And to ask them to then also supply us with a flexible design plan costs them money, costs us time. And they can choose to discard it because they already have the right for a traditional subdivision. So
Well, I actually think it's the opposite. I think they can do the flexible with the Berlin planning board, but if, I think that's how like the one subdivision that you reviewed maybe a couple of years ago ended up kind of as a hybrid.
Right.
Because the applicant preferred the traditional and the board prefers the flexible.
So yeah, I think.
So it
some of
helps
that,
see-
I know it seems like, yeah, you're an addict, it's an addict expense to applicants. I think the original intent of that was to encourage the use of conservation style subdivision. So kind of making someone say, okay, let's have them at least take a look at what it could be, and maybe they would like to go forward with that, and the planning board can encourage them to go in that direction if you think it's preferred.
But
So I
taking
think
a
that's the
look-
thought.
Taking a look is a mild term. What it translates into is they have to pay for all those plans.
Well,
And then they can choose to not use them if they have enough land.
No, I think it's written where the board chooses the plan, like if, so the traditional is to show that you can support, say it's four lots. Right, and then you could create this flexible design of open space and reduced lot size for the lot sizes and setbacks and you could do whatever
Right.
you want there.
Right.
Whatever the board determines, but in order to look at that, you have to make sure that they can conform to a traditional subdivision first.
That I realize, and that's determined pretty much right up front. They know that coming in, whether they have that right. And if they do, I don't see the point of forcing them to supply another plan that they can legally throw away anyway.
Well, instead of debating it tonight, let's take a look, let's take a look at it and see how we might want to change it, how well it has worked in the past, and what, if anything, we need to do for the future.
I
And
know
minutes?
what you're saying, yeah, I know what you're saying, but I think the way that ordinance is written is they're supposed to be combined with flexible.
Yeah. Let's say, rather than trying to do it from memory tonight, let's take a look at it sometime over the next several months. It's, I'm sure we will have some more subdivisions, so we probably want to do this in a fairly timely manner.
You're gonna have,
A couple, so we have Balin, Milliken, Surfside, not all subdivisions, we're trying to think of applications. You'll see the Highland Home, Nancy's, you'll see. Manatee's, Ellen, Surfside, Highland Home, Gaffett, Balin. You're gonna see there again, master plan, and that's coming
Okay. I see we have plenty to keep us busy in 2022.
I still have these proposals that were given to us months ago. Can I ask a quick question?
Not in Berlin.
I'm sorry?
We can Berlin.
Oh, we can, wonderful. What about this one? Is the flexible plan the same as the cluster subdivision?
They're gonna come back with this. Yeah,
Hold on to L, because I don't know how much of it's going to. It's
Okay.
going to change, but maybe like some of like the information there.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I can recycle the other one.
So the cluster subdivision no longer required? It's-
We'll take a look at that for a minute, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, our fortunately, it's required to submit the design, the concept.
Okay, I'll review and then I get that.
I was gonna say, I need to go back and look at it. I knew it thoroughly at one point. I'd forgotten stuff.
We don't see that.
We don't, that's why it's probably not a high priority, but I think that there may be several down the road that are coming that we may want to have this in place, so,
So, sure.
okay.
Maybe an understatement, can we get a copy of what the rulings are so that we can? You said that, you know, that a flexible design is required and the option is for a traditional. I'd like to see the rule, the regulation.
Another,
What we're gonna look into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's in the subdivision regulations.
Oh, it is.
Yeah. At the level.
you might just tell us what it is, and if it's not too long, just print it out and send it to us,
Or email.
or email it to us, that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, the minutes are gonna roll over until January. There'll be 2 sets at that point to approve. And anything else before I make a motion to close the meeting?
Just a quick question, if I can.
Sure.
When we were looking at the plans for the surface area, behind Persephone's hutch, there, it seems like there's a lot of details that, I just felt like I wanted to have a big map or a visual on the new setbacks, because the DEM is changing. Are they moving their lines of usage? Is this part of the new buffer regulation?
Yeah, freshwater, freshwater wetlands, well, I think that they're starting to get coastal too, but,
Or if it was the coastal part, I was getting a little like, whoa,
yeah, no,
I don't know what's going on
I
anymore, so I'm like, whoa.
I've been telling the freshwater wetland, that's the one I was talking about, that's already been approved, adopted. So I haven't looked at the new, coastal, what they're looking at, but I think that was following the freshwater rule change.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's following the freshwater. I just know that it was changing and just in terms of a visual to understand that project, it seemed like there were multiple layers of regulation. And it was hard for me to understand how to interpret those multiple layers of regulation, just because I didn't know, is the state changing, or CRMC changing? that?
Their jurisdictional area,
Yeah.
they're proposing a change to jurisdictional.
Yeah,
area.
based on the FEMA maps from Laura.
Okay, I'll look at that, okay, yeah, I don't know, the specifics, yeah.
That's it, thank you.
Good, okay. Oh, okay, I make a motion that the meeting be adjourned. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you, guys. This was a very good discussion.